All right, so we're just wrapping up our 1 year round the world trip, and we cataloged literally every single dollar, euro, rupiah, won, Hungarian forint, every single penny that we spent on this entire trip. Yes, we're nerds.
If I do a sum if on the test values of this.
I literally have an Excel spreadsheet available for you to download below with all of the raw data for every single thing that we spent in case you want to take a look at it.
And I know a lot of you love a good spreadsheet.
We are literally just finishing this trip today. So you could not get more recent information if you tried. We had budgeted, we had made a spreadsheet, and we had thought it was gonna cost $35,000.
The exact amount that we spent in this entire round the world trip was?
Just over $40,000.
Oh, come on, give us the exact number.
Was $40,064.96. Did I get that right? Yes.
So a couple of things that we have to tell you about this trip. So we went to 19 total countries, and while we were gone for a whole year, we actually counted 351 travel days because there was a little time period we went home for some family things. This number is also representative for the two of us.
Yeah.
In total. We get that question a lot. So yes, the budget that we put at the end of every single one of our videos represents the cost for two of us together. Towards the end of our trip, we started traveling with other people. So a lot of the costs were shared, which helped offset the cost.
Yeah, all these costs are still for the two of us. Like, we split it our half and then whoever we were with their half. Also, a major way that we offset costs throughout this entire trip were frequent flyer miles, and we have an entire course on this on Skillshare. It saved us a bunch of money, and we're gonna reveal exactly how big that bunch of money was at the end of the video, but it was substantial. You can save a ton of money while you're traveling by saving up some frequent flyer miles and points. Another thing that was unique to this trip is we were traveling kind of during the middle of this pandemic that we were in, so we actually ended up spending about $750 just on COVID tests throughout this trip for the two of us. And there were a lot of other additional costs, but there were also some savings where hotels in some places were cheaper or flights to some places were cheaper.
Timing is a huge part of our travel and the cost of this trip too.
So just real quick, our entire trip in like 1 minute here. So we started off in Rome, and then we traveled around Europe using the Eurail pass for about 3.5 months. And then we had to head home for a little bit, celebrate my brother's wedding, and then we flew back out to the Southeast Asia leg of the trip. We started off in Singapore, went up to Thailand for about 2 months, made it down to Australia, drove a camper van basically as far as we could go, even though half of it was flooded at the time. And then we met up with my parents, traveled for another 2 months, ending up in South Korea at the end of this trip, 19 countries, 351 days later. At the end of this trip, spending about $40,000. All right, so we've got 7 categories that we're gonna break down all of our expenses into, and then we're gonna talk about those in a little bit more nuance. But category number 1 is transportation, and this is anything that we use to get from one place to another, whether it was an airplane or a boat or a hot air balloon or
tuk-tuk.
Or tuk-tuk. Right.
That total was $11,839.28.
Yeah, so this is about a third of all of our trip costs was this transportation cost. One of the most expensive flights that we took was actually to Singapore. We had to take a specific vaccinated travel lane flight to get there that we couldn't use points on at all. Getting over to Rome, we used points for that, and then kind of getting around Europe was pretty cheap. Eurail pass constituted a large portion of this, which is what we used to get around Europe for 2 months straight.
But then once we stayed in a country for a longer time, or stayed in a general area or general continent for a longer time, transportation started to get a little bit more affordable. We could take different forms of transportation. And the next category, accommodations, or where we stay. This actually ended up costing the most of all the categories, which makes a lot of sense. It's where we sleep at night. And that total was $13,613.13.
First try. Yeah, most of the time we're staying in like kind of budget hotels in a private room with a private bathroom, generally like close to the center of town. There are some places that we stayed in hostels and we love those. We just didn't need to, and honestly it didn't save us all that much money. And because of COVID, most of the hostels just weren't open yet.
But then once we moved to places like Thailand or Korea and Malaysia, Indonesia, we were able to stay in a lot more beautiful, fancy, really like out of control hotels for like $30, $40 a night.
This was another third of the entirety of the costs of our trip. So just between transportation, accommodation, you're looking at like 2/3 of the cost of your entire trip. Okay, moving on. Food.
It is lunchtime.
So our total food budget for the entirety of the trip was $8,487.37.
Woo!
At the beginning of our trip, we were eating literally as cheap as we possibly could.
Muesli for days, bread and cheese and meats,
What?
sustained primarily on bread.
Just more bread.
And this was also the very beginning of our trip, so it was almost this feeling like, finally we get to take this trip, but also we need to also travel for a whole year.
This is probably going to be the area where people's budgets start to diverge significantly.
Yes.
Flights kind of cost what they cost. Hotels cost approximately the same everywhere that you go. Food budget, I mean, if you're going and you're eating out 3 times a day, you can expect to spend probably like 2 to 3 times as much as we did here.
We love good food, but we also love really affordable good food.
So yeah, and I think that this shows our like perspective on travel, which is that we're basing all of our decisions not on how to like condense the most experience into a small amount of time. We're trying to make this trip last as long as we possibly can. We're trying to keep traveling for as long as we possibly can. So a lot of these decisions and the way that we look at this travel and the budget that we have for it is based around that. So the next category is entertainment, and this is like when we went to go see the Colosseum of Rome, the Vatican Museum,
The K-pop concerts, the gondola tours, the Trumbuck Falls of Switzerland. The entertainment category cost a total of $2,141.05.
I think based on what I was just talking about, this category is really low for us.
Turns out there are a lot of free and affordable things to do when you travel that just include sightseeing, walking around a city. This also reflects kind of the way that we travel, which is generally just trying to experience a place as budget as possible.
Okay, so next up is the cost of getting into places. So this is like visas, for example. And in fact, this is primarily visas to get into places. There are some other things like bureaucracy. Extending our visa in Thailand was a big chunk of this, or additional health insurance that we had to buy for different countries that we went to.
And this total came to $851.57.
Yeah, not a lot to say here.
The next category, the catch-all, the containing everything, which is meaning catch-all. Why am I describing this? The good old miscellaneous tab.
Yeah, so this is kind of where everything else went that we couldn't figure out where to put it.
This includes things like COVID tests, souvenirs that we bought, insurance, Airlo, which is, you know, data, SIM cards. When you get a blister on the Camino de Santiago and you need to get a little blister pad.
Or that new shirt that you need because you've been wearing the literal exact same t-shirt for the entirety of the trip and then you need to get new ones.
In total, we spent $2,293.37 in this miscellaneous category.
All right, last category, alcohol. This is an important category for us just to be aware of how much money we're spending just in this one particular category. We thought it might be interesting for you guys to know as well. We spent $839.19 on alcohol, and that completes the entirety of it. This is all, what's the total number again? $40,064.96. All of it together for our entire trip, which is $114.15 per day. Things that surprise us. The first thing that surprised me was that we actually spent more per day in Southeast Asia than we did in Europe. And I think it's because we just kind of like went like, wow, we can eat anything, we can do anything, we can go on all the trips, we can go anywhere, we can, yeah.
Especially when our friends and our family started joining us. I do think because it was towards the end of our trip, we started to really seize the day, carpe the diem, and start spending more money.
Yes.
One of the things that surprised me the most, because this was my first time quitting my job, taking a 1-year around the world trip, was we on average spent about $3,000 per month, which is kind of what we spent back at home, wherever we were, whether it was in California or Hawaii. I thought that we would spend way more traveling per day and per month than we would when we just stayed at home.
I think what we would do differently is move a little slower. It felt too fast.
And this is speaking just from the cost standpoint, but also I think in the last year, which we'll get to in a full-on documentary that we're working really hard on to wrap up this experience, but I also think moving too quickly meant extremely high costs and also high anxiety and a lot of other things that you just don't really account for.
Another thing that I would do differently, and this was just difficult on this trip because of the time that we actually took the trip, I would invite more people out to come and hang out with us. Some of the best times, if not the best times, are when we were traveling with other people and getting to kind of experience this all together. Parents at the end of the trip with Tia and Cheveo, who are a big part of this trip for us.
And our friends from Hawaii, and not only does it save on costs because we get to share accommodations, but we get to have different kinds of experiences.
All right, so this number is going to be a little bit shocking. Admittedly, honestly, when I added it all up, I was a little shocked too, but we saved $13,000 just on this 1 year trip alone, just by using our hotel points for frequent flyer miles. The way that I calculated this number is I took the thing that we were going to buy with points, like let's say it was the flight from Dallas to Rome that we took to start our trip, and then I looked up exactly how much that flight cost, and that was what I added up as like the equivalent cash cost. And then I did the same for all the hotels and everything else, and it added up to $13,000 across this entire trip, 20 nights for free of accommodation, plus a bulk of our really, really long flights being paid for.
Not to mention all the conveniences and just the luxury sometimes you get to experience, because we're definitely not luxury people. We certainly enjoy luxury things, just for free.
All right, so that's it. $40,000 over 351 days, $20,000 per person. That's how much a round the world trip actually costs. If you have any questions about any of this, just throw it down in the comments below. We'll answer it as quick as we can. Keep an eye out for this round the world trip documentary that we've got coming out when it's done, hopefully soon.
We really hope this was helpful, and thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for being a part of this massive journey that we got to take. We're so lucky, and we're so glad that you have come along, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one together.
Yeah. All right, see you soon.
Travel Thursday, Travel Thursday. Ooh, I missed that beat. Travel. Why is this so hard? We haven't done this in so long.
We're a little rusty.
Like this kettle. Okay. Ready? We spent a total of...
Please don't. I need to look at the exact number. I didn't know she was gonna hit me with that. I didn't know. You'll notice that there's gonna be a cut here every single time, right between when I say was and then the number, because the numbers are very specific.
On this Lapo Tapo.
Right. It was $114. Divide that by 2, it's 57. Am I doing that math right?
I don't know. I wasn't listening.
Surprise me.
Hi, kitty. What do you got to tell us? So many things to say.